Welcome to my August webinar on egoism. And I put the subtitle, The Last Stress, on it because in my experience of working with people, as well as according to Vedic literature, the attachments of the ego to the things that we identify ourselves by are the last things that our ego will give up so that it can relax and expand to the infinite level, which in the Vedic literature is known as Atma, which is the self, written with a capital S usually, capital S, self. I had worked out a variety of things I was going to present this evening, and then my computer went into a precarious state. I rebooted, and it seemed to be remaining in that precarious state, so I don't actually have access to the notes that I created for this webinar. So I must confess I'm going to be winging it, but hopefully I'll be successful. I wanted to start by showing you, I hope this works. Many of you are familiar with this edition of the Srimad Valmiki Ramayana, sometimes just called the Valmiki Ramayana. And in it is a story after the hero of the story, Ram, has met and married Sita, and his brothers have married Sita's sisters. And there's been all these festivities, and it's really a great show. They're headed back to Ayodhya, and they encounter a famous person known as Parashuram. And he's known as the slayer of the Kshatriya, the warriors. He had slain the Kshatriya because one of them had killed his father. And he was angry, and so he wanted to get even. And although he had made amends and had, well, not with the Kshatriya, but it just within himself, and tried to deal with it, and had done great, as they call it, austerities, meaning he had lived alone for a long period of time in a very simple state, meditating a lot. He came across the party, the wedding party, as they were returning home to Ayodhya, and challenged Ram to pick up and string and place an arrow and draw it fully back to test Ram's overall capability, both physically and his worthiness as a person. And of course, there's all this spiritual meaning to all of the things that were going on in all of this. And Ram succeeds in doing this, and in doing so, he removes from Parashuram the last attachments that he had. He basically doesn't teach him humility, but he renders him humble by virtue of demonstrating that he is actually the incarnation, couldn't find the word, the actual incarnation of Vishnu. So all of this is esoteric unless you know your Vedic literature, but the story is a beautiful one because it illustrates this powerful attachment that we have to our own identity, the things that we call ourself. But that's the small s self, that's our individual self. In the Vedic literature, that's usually called jiva, and the unbounded self, the infinite, eternal, undestroyable self is Atma. So we identify ourselves usually first by gender. That starts, as a pediatrician, I can tell you, at the moment of birth. The two things people want to know, both of them are very curious. One of them is they want to know the time of birth. It is if in our genes we understand that astrology is meaningful, and most astrology is based on the birth time and place. And so most people want to know the exact time of birth. And then the next thing they want to know, or at least one of the two first things they want to know, is the gender of the child. In most cases, that's straightforward. We know from appearance that a child is a male or a female. There is a situation known as ambiguous genitalia, where the doctors will not know by looking at the genitalia whether it's actually a male or a female. Fortunately, those are very rare. I have never seen one myself. That is, I never attended a birth at which that happened, or even took care of a baby where that was the case, but it can happen. And I only mention that because in these days of gender fluidity and non-binary gender identifications, there's a great deal of tension and stress that often occurs between the sense of identity of a person and the physical appearance of a person. So I just mentioned those things, excuse me, but gender certainly is one of the most important ways in which we identify ourselves. I'm going to take a drink here, see if I can smooth out my voice. I'm discovering with these long days at home alone during the pandemic, where I don't do very much talking, that my voice actually kind of gives out, and I need to speak more. So hopefully by the end of the evening, my voice will be nice and smooth again as it gets, shall we say, warmed up. I did not do any warm-up exercises before the webinar, and maybe I should start doing that in the future. I can remember my grandmother, who was a professional singer, doing hours of exercises for her voice, and definitely always warmed up her voice before she tried to sing. It's funny because that reminds me of the fact that she used to sing on WHO radio in Des Moines, and at least at some time during that, the announcer for the show was none other than Ronald Reagan, who was just starting his career in radio at that time. And he had the interesting relationship as a young man of introducing this older group of women who were singers. They weren't that old, but they were older than he was by like twice his age. And so that's just an interesting and useless side. Anyway, Parashuram was humbled by the fact that Ram could lift this bow that had come from Vishnu down through his line of descent. And Ram was able to string the bow and put the arrow on the bow. And in doing so, then to destroy the last of Parashuram's attachments and make him humble. And so in the course of evolution, it is taught that it is our attachments to our identity that retard our evolution. Energetically, in my line of work, the way that shows up is that there is energy invested in these point values, in these specific values, such as our gender, our profession, our relationships, who we know, our social status, who we get to relate to in society, who we look up to, who we view as our peers in society, and who we look down upon, even subconsciously. Not that we necessarily are looking down on people, but we may look down on people, for instance, who are at a lower economic status, people who are perhaps either say, well, we'll just say unemployed or handicapped or some such thing. And this is a thing that happens kind of automatically within the context of a society. Not every society has this kind of structure, but most of the societies that you and I are familiar with certainly do. And we then tend, without really realizing it, to look at certain people as beneath us and other people as above us. And then, of course, hopefully a collection of people that we look on as peers and people that we feel comfortable relating to without having that background feeling of, oh, they're better than I am and they're judging me, or I'm better than they are and I'm judging them. So we seek to let go of those kinds of attachments. So we have this whole arsenal of attachments, plus we have a whole bunch of rules about life. In this day and age, we call those memes, M-E-M-E. And a meme is basically a rule that becomes like a subroutine in an operating system of a computer within our own brains. We usually aren't aware of them, but they can be rules like I brush my teeth in the morning and before I go to bed. So I eat 3 meals a day. I do or I do not eat snacks. I always say hello to people, even if I'm not sure that I even know who they are. Just so many rules that we use to navigate life. And those are generally culturally derived. Our parents, our churches, our schools, and our communities basically civilize us. They teach us what it is to be a member of that community, whether that's the community of your household or the larger community in which you live, or indeed the whole country, and for some people, the whole world. There are certain rules. And generally, we like people that obey our rules. That is, they have the same set of rules in them that we have. For instance, we find it very hard to trust people that we think tell lies, don't tell the truth. And so we may have a rule that says, be very cautious about people because they may not be telling the truth. And we should always check very carefully to make sure that they are trustworthy by, seeing over a period of time whether they really are trustworthy. And so that may be one of our operating rules. And so we may be even quite cautious in meeting people and getting to know them. I remember a wonderful story about a fellow who is in a town, and I believe it was in Georgia, is where they said this took place. I don't know if it actually took place or if it was just a story. It's not one of those things you can verify. At least I'm not going to take the time to do it. And the story goes that the fellow comes into a cafe and orders something to eat, and he starts to chat up one of the local folk and talking to him. And the guy runs a sawmill, and they just get to chatting about business and community and what it's like there in this town and so on and so forth. And they chat for a while, and then finally it's one of the other of them ready to go. I guess it was the guy with the sawmill is ready to go. And the fellow says, can you supply me with 600 board feet of, knot free, no knots, meaning the little round things in the wood, planks by the such and such a date. And the guy says, sure. And he says, what price can you give me for, that much wood? And the guy goes, well, I could sell it to you for such and such a price. The guy says, fine. They shake hands and that's it. So somebody was observing this. He says, you didn't even know this guy and you just placed this large order. Why did you trust him? And he said, well, we chatted. I felt like I was able to get to know him. He was open. He seemed like an honest man who was deeply involved in his community. And I felt that was criteria. I could trust him. And so I gave him this order, and I'm very confident that he will fulfill the order as we placed it. And so, we learn to trust. We learn to navigate life. I'm using trust as an example here, but it's all things in life. We learn by getting a sense of the things, and then we make rules about how we navigate that. So those rules, those memes, are very important to us. But the problem is that we can hold on to those rules in a way, we put so much energy in them that we become rigid inside. We become as if tied up inside. And anything that violates such rules is very disturbing. And we may get digestive problems, heart problems, breathing problems. We may feel very nervous because the rules weren't followed. They were violated. So these kinds of things are very important to us, and they really have a huge impact on how we feel and literally how well we are, or how sick we may get. Because if these rules are violated, and we may find ourselves feeling very insecure, very anxious, very angry, very frustrated. So any of those negative emotions build up more energy around that. And what does that do? It keeps us bound to our small self, our jiva. It keeps us from being free to follow the internal guidance of nature, nature's intelligence, creative intelligence, Marshy called it, to make life automatic for us. When we really are established in the self, then we're free. It's not that we have no rules, but we're free from the painful influence of violation of those rules. And so we can adapt, we can change in a situation, or we can accept that someone fails us and doesn't, behave in a way that we would prefer. This happens, of course. I'm deeply involved in politics, as many of you know. It happens in politics all the time, where you usually don't get what you want. You usually get something in the direction of what you want, but it's never complete. It's never as full as if you were running the show. And that's because other people have their desires and their needs. And so politics is the business of navigating conflicting, often conflicting and sometimes just slightly different values and slightly different goals. And, sometimes what we need, particularly in leadership, is people with the ability to say, now let's sit down at the table and we're going to have a conversation about what you need and what you need and what you need. And we're going to lay all of that out, and we're going to try to understand what everybody needs, and then see if we can find some way of meeting as much of those needs as we possibly can. And so politics is often very much a business of compromising. Hopefully not really compromising your values, but just understanding that, well, in order for me to get something, I have to give something. It doesn't mean I have to give up, but it means I may have to let somebody else have something that they want, so that we can move forward and everybody, feel pretty good about a situation. So politics is a very difficult area. It can be difficult in a household. People have different views about political things on the outside or even on the inside. I was just reading a review of a book coming out this week. I'm sorry, I'm going to forget the gal's name because it was an unusual name, who was doing a thing on mansplaining. And she took classic art from the classical period of art, what is that, 16, 1700s, and put captions on the pictures that illustrated various forms of mansplaining. I'm not going to describe mansplaining, but the point was that she was illustrating for people something about how they navigate the world that was actually pretty painful for the women folk, how men proceed with things. And I think the book is actually going to be of great value, because it will show people, in the same way that I think Black Lives Matter is now showing white people how the racism is systemic in this country. It shows people how their beliefs, how their rules, how their memes impact others. And so there may be rules about gender, there may be rules about race. It works the same way. And oftentimes we're just not aware of these things. I made a kind of joke about it to myself, actually put it up on a Facebook post. I now know more than I thought I needed to know about mansplaining, which was to say, I realized that there were certain things that I might do that could be interpreted that way. And I was very surprised some months back when somebody said, "Oh, you're just mansplaining." And my initial reaction, I didn't write it, but my initial reaction was, "No, I'm not. I'm going to have to go back, see if I can find that post. I doubt if I can, but if I could, to find out whether I really was mansplaining now that I actually understand a lot more about what it is. And the same thing has been true about race as I've grown up and lived my life. Um, I really didn't have to confront race when I was a kid. It was only later that I began to have interactions with people who were not white. And then, I grew up in Des Moines, and my school was 98% white. Um, so, it just wasn't something I had to confront. But it was only later that I came to understand it. And interesting, one of the experiences that really got me thinking, actually, although I had a hard time at the time, Malcolm X came and spoke, and he spoke in the student union, and not in any kind of a lecture format. He literally stood up on a box in the middle of the room and just basically ranted. At least that's how I felt it was. He was mostly complaining about white folks and the things white folks do to black folks. And I didn't get it. And I had to give it some thought afterwards. And then over the years, began to realize, and even still today realize more and more, what white privilege is and how racism is systemic in this country, and how, particularly in the North here, I think white folks don't realize the racist ideas that they hold, the attitudes that they hold, the memes that are running their operating system in their brain about how life can be. One of them is that you're okay, meaning I'm a white person, I'm talking about a black person, you're okay if you act like me, meaning if you follow the same memes that I follow. And if you have different memes, well, then you might not be okay. But the prejudice is there because if you came from, say, just say you came from England and you had some different memes, we speak the same language a little bit differently, but we speak the same language. We have theoretically very similar backgrounds, and yet we have some different memes. Heck, even some of my friends, who grew up in this country, they have different memes. Not entirely different, but some of them are different. And some of those people, I maybe keep it an arm's length. That's hard to do on the screen like this. You have to kind of do it like that. Kind of keep them at an arm's length because we don't necessarily see eye to eye. It's not about disagreement. It's about a viewpoint of the world. So we don't resonate or we don't communicate effectively because we have different rules about the world. So these things are very hard to give up. Let me talk a little bit about letting go of our attachments. And unfortunately, I had a quote that I heard Marshy from an old lecture today, this morning. And I was going to read it to you, but I can't get access to it without possibly crashing the computer and ruining the webinar. And basically what he was saying is that everything is the self. We always have access to it. And he didn't say we become aware of holding ourselves back by imposing certain rules, certain ideas on our life and and the people we associate with, our expectations for other people. But he was saying basically transcend. He always used to say transcend, because contact with that field of Atma, the self, which is easily done through his meditation program, contact with that takes us to that level where we are completely free. And then we can just act in accord with the will of God, with the intent of nature, with cosmic or creative intelligence. And operating in that way, then we aren't attached. So the detachment doesn't come through effort. It comes perhaps through recognizing that, I'm doing this. I don't really need to do that. I'm feeling free because I've meditated and now I feel, unbounded and I'm not bound by, that's what unbounded means, is not bound by my experience and the rules that I've acquired over the course of my life. Now, it doesn't mean that we live without rules. I got to make this quite clear. It doesn't mean that we don't have rules about how we interact with other people. We do. It means that we don't put so much energy on it that we can't deal with people who are a little bit different or even a lot different. We have more flexibility. We have more flexibility. We may feel closer to those who are more like us, that is, have the same sets of rules. We may feel closer to those people, but we can still interact with those who are even very, very different. And that can be on the political spectrum or the social position or the economic position, which those two things kind of go together. So it's possible to be able to relate to all kinds of people because we are who we are, and we're not going to be shaken by somebody who is not like us. And maybe, for instance, somebody who's very assertive, run into them. I remember a character, I call him that. I remember a person who, let's just say they just used to assert themselves in certain social situations. And they had it down pat. They knew just what to say. And they, kind of like, and I realized that at first I was kind of put off because I saw it happen many times actually. At first I was put off by their behavior. And then I began to feel like, they need that. They need that. And it doesn't really affect me. It doesn't really matter. If they assert themselves, they can assert themselves, right? It's most of the time, it wasn't really diminishing my life in any real way. It was just their behavior was against my rules. You don't act like that. You act graciously and courteously. And if your person is pushy, okay, so they're pushy. That's just who they are. And I got along with them okay. I'd known them for many, many years. And we always got along just fine because I didn't react to their being pushy. And most of the time they weren't, and particularly when we were just chatting, we got along okay. It wasn't a problem. So that's the kind of thing that I wanted to suggest. So we get past this bondage, this attachment to things by transcending and by having the attitude, I don't have to be rigid about this. I don't have to be so invested. And nature has this wonderful way of showing us where we're attached, where we're invested, meaning we have energy involved in something. It does that to us. That's part of life. And, there's the recluse way of life of being quiet and inward and just letting go of things. But, for those of us who are, as we call them, householders, people who are out in the world, then life has this way of showing us, oh, there's this attachment, that things should be a certain way. People shouldn't be rude to me. I shouldn't let people treat me rudely. Or not. I can just let it go because it doesn't really matter. And I'm not going to change them. I can't change them. They are who they are. And they've made it very clear who they are. So, that's just the way it is. Now, where does that come up in life today? For almost all of us, you're either a masker or you're a no masker, meaning wearing a mask in this time of the COVID epidemic. And if you are a person who believes you should wear a mask when you're out in public and you see somebody who's not wearing a mask, how do you react to that? Does it make you angry? Do you want to go tell them off? I did that once, but only once. Not because anything happened. It's just I realized it's not really a big deal. You just fine. I just say, oh, can you please stay, a good distance away from me because you're not wearing a mask. And as you can see, I am. I don't say that, because it's obvious. But, I like to wear a mask when I'm out in public. Now, if I'm outdoors, there's plenty of breeze, we're keeping about 6 feet away from each other. I'm not going to worry about it, But in indoors, when I go into a shop, yeah, I put a mask on. Fortunately, all the food markets now in town either require or very strongly encourage people to wear masks. And I'm very glad that they do. And interestingly, over the last, I think it's a week or two now, I think many more people, several times more people, almost everyone now is wearing a mask when they're out in the stores. And, I saw kids, little kids wearing masks, 5-year-olds, and I'm going like, they can do that. It seems like a big thing, because somebody's telling you got to do it. But if you understand that it's for the safety and health and well-being of everybody in the community, yeah, I can go with that. It's okay. We'll do that. So it's the same kind of thing. You see, you take the energy out of it, and then you can just do it. I always find that after I wear a mask for about 2 minutes, I forget I have it on. I'll walk out of a store and get in my car and go, I have my mask still on. I don't need to have it on anymore. I'm alone. So it's like that. People take the energy out of a situation, and then it's amazing what you can do. And it feels so much better because you don't worry about it anymore. You don't have any energy invested in it. You're not angry. You're not hurt. You're not anxious. It's okay. Sometimes I see people walking outdoors with a mask on. And I'm going like, I wonder, it just makes me wonder, are you really so worried about that, about catching COVID? Is that why you're wearing the mask? Or is it just that you don't quite understand that when you're outdoors and there's nobody else around, it's not really necessary? It's not like the air out here is actually all that dangerous. If you're indoors with people, yeah, no problem about that, because we know that, particles containing viruses are floating around in the air. And wearing a mask is highly helpful. It's not absolutely protective. Nothing's perfect, but it's pretty good. And I was fortunate enough to get a hold of an N95 mask back near the beginning of this. I was wearing a cloth mask for a while. I was a little worried about it. I didn't think it was all that effective as a filter. And, now I have an N95 and I just go about my business. And I make sure that it gets sterilized each day. I do that. I'll tell you what I do. I leave it in my car in the sun where it's hot. And the heat and the sunlight kill the virus. And that's pretty well known. So anyway, that's how I keep my mask dry and sterile. And it's not just the virus. It kills, like all the germs. Because it gets pretty hot in my car. It's out in the sun, and the sun is shining right on the mask. So works pretty well. Thank you. So far, so good. Anyway, I hope that is of some help. We're going to go on after I sign off from this. We're going to go on to a group clearing session where we'll actually go in and look at some of those attachments that individuals who are on the conference call have. And then we will be able to clear some of that energy that they're holding. So anyway, I encourage everybody who may eventually watch this to sign up for future webinars so that you can actually participate in the group clearing session. We do these once a month, usually on the second Tuesday, but it varies a little bit from month to month. But I hope you will join us again very soon.